Thank you again, Dr. Simon Poole, for joining us today on If This Food Could Talk. So, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Now, it is totally my pleasure. For everybody out there, I want you guys to know that I actually met Dr. Poole how about a month or so back. We were in an olive oil conference outside of Washington, D.C. And Simon, I hope you don't mind I'm calling you Simon, but Dr. Poole, which one do you prefer? I should have asked.
Simon, please. Yes, absolutely.
All right, so Simon and he was sharing all this fantastic information, like science, evidence-backed science evidence, scientific evidence about the Mediterranean diet and extra virgin olive oil. And I thought, I need more Simon in my life, and I need to share Simon with the rest of the listeners out there. So, Simon, take a moment and please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yes. So I have been a medical doctor in the UK, practicing on the front line of medicine for more than 30 years. Also had a role in public health, so population health based medicine as well. And a number of years ago, I was sitting in my medical office doing the usual thing that doctors do, which is to give medication to people who are sick. And I kind of had a light bulb moment when I was reading some research papers about the importance of lifestyle medicine, the importance of prevention, the importance of helping people and supporting people to remain healthy rather than to just treat people when they're sick. So I became interested in nutrition, and in particular with the Mediterranean diet, which we now know, those many years later, we now know to be really the pattern of diet that has the most evidence to back it up in terms of its quite extraordinary preventative effect. So I continue to practice my medicine, but was telling my patients all about the exciting things about nutrition, and particularly the Mediterranean diet, and also extra virgin olive oil. And they invited me to attend talks in the community and to talk more about it. And so really it came from there. And now I'm pretty much full time writing books, speaking, and doing events like the one where it was such a delight to meet you a month or so ago.
That is great. So, one of the things that struck me was the discussion about polyphenols and its effect on, well, anti-inflammation, heart disease, all these things, gut microbiomes. Is there something that you can share? Because you've written how many books now, Simon? You've you've written a quite.
I think I'm on my eighth with 11. I've got three to do in the next year as well. So so yes, I've got a fairly heavy writing a few months ahead of me. But yes, so I'm publishing, and I always mention polyphenols. I really want to get chapters in about polyphenols to introduce people to the idea of how extraordinary they are.
I totally agree. Now, bring it down. Bring it down for us. What exactly is a polyphenol, and how does it help and affect when we consume it?
Okay, well, that's great. I mean, I love the fact that we've dived into polyphenols already. I think that's really, really great because, we've had decades, haven't we, about arguing about fats, arguing about proteins, and arguing about carbs, all the macronutrients, which are the foods that, the foods, well, first of all, foods are not just carbs. They're not just proteins. They usually, almost always contain a combination, most of the foods that we have. And we're kind of sorted now, I think, in terms of fats, carbs, and proteins. We should have whole grain carbs, low GI. We should have, enough protein and preferably plant-based predominantly so that we get all those additional fiber and the polyphenols in the plants. And we understand now about fats. We shouldn't be on a low fat drive. It's about the quality of fats. It's about those unsaturated fats, particularly those you get in nuts, avocado, olive oil, those kind of foods. So I think we're done with these food fights, these macronutrient wars. Even though there's still a low carb, brigade out there, and there are sometimes when we should be reducing our carbohydrates, of course, but anyway. So what I think is really exciting is that we're moving away from that to actually look at compounds, we are just beginning to understand how they work and how they operate. And these compounds are generally called bioactive compounds, and the majority of these fall into the group we call polyphenols. And polyphenols have these very exciting anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. And now we know that most chronic diseases actually are driven by inflammation. And, when I started practicing medicine in the last century, we believed that heart disease was just, it was a little bit like, your pipes get clogged in your plumbing, don't they? And you have to unblock your pipes. Actually, we now know that it's about the inflammation of cholesterol, oxidized cholesterol plaques. And so it's polyphenols which are coming into the fore now as the really exciting nutritional story, I think, of the next several decades.
Oh, that's great. So so it's not just a simple story of clogged arteries. It's actually about the inflammation, is what I'm hearing.
Well, that's absolutely right. And my latest book, which is due to be late released in October, which is Managing Cholesterol for Dummies. It's with the Dummies series, really addresses this idea of the fact that we know that cholesterol is important, and most of us have our various, our lipid panel, our cholesterol panel taken. But what we often don't know is what level of oxidation there is of our cholesterol, because doctors don't directly measure that. It's quite challenging to measure it. But if we could, we would know our true risks of developing heart disease. Of course, the more bad cholesterol you have, the more likely it is probably to be oxidized. But, in my practice, I could have somebody sitting in the chair opposite me, somebody with a certain level of cholesterol, who doesn't exercise, who doesn't have the Mediterranean diet, and somebody with exactly the same numbers, but actually we know that they're filling their bodies with anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, bioactive compounds like polyphenols in their diet, in the foods that they're eating, and exercising regularly. And their risk of heart disease, of course, is much less, but we don't measure that in our assessment. So that's, I think, a great thing that's missing, which I pick up and explore in some detail in this book about cholesterol and heart disease. It's about oxidation and it's about inflammation.
So how does somebody listening to this ask their doctors to measure their oxidized blood levels?
Well, at the moment, that the answer is probably going to be no, because we don't have the kind of standardized techniques that are recognized to measure it, other than in experimental laboratories, and really looking at the levels of oxidized cholesterol for experiments. But what we do know for sure is that it's oxidized, inflamed cholesterol plaques that are the ones that become unstable and the ones that form clots and then result in heart disease. And so this oxidation inflammation, what we're now beginning to understand is that there are elements in our diet which are very, very rich in fantastic foods, fantastic tasting, really delicious foods that we can load our bodies with these antioxidants and anti-inflammatory, in particular, these polyphenols.
Okay, so let's talk about where can we find some of these foods? What in particular are you talking about?
So they're almost all plant-based foods. I mean, the exception is you can pick up some polyphenols from honey. Fundamentally, honey is a plant-based
I never.
original food.
Sure, sure.
Um, and there is some in mother's milk. Polyphenols come in mother's milk. But apart from that, they're plant-based compounds. So plants produce polyphenols to protect themselves from the stresses of the environment. And the stresses in the environment are things like oxygen, because oxygen is very reactive. And so if you think about an apple, it has an outer layer which is very rich in polyphenols. Cut it open, and it'll soon begin to have the effect of oxidation and change inside. So they produce these compounds to protect themselves from oxidation. They also actually use them, because plants are very smart, they use them to protect themselves from animals eating them. So they often have a slightly bitter, slightly pungent flavor as well. And they often use them to signal to animals when a food is ripe, got enough sugar, when the seed is mature from the plant's perspective. So it changes the colors of the polyphenols, slightly decreases the bitter ones, and makes the fruit ready to eat so that the seed can be deposited with a little lump of fertilizer somewhere else. So plants are really smart. They're producing these polyphenols as protective mechanisms. And you're probably always already beginning to pick up that we know that if they're in challenged plants, they're in colorful plants. So actually, they're in things like colored fruits and vegetables, contain lots and lots of polyphenols, chocolate, red wine in particular, um, coffee, things like that, and particular extra virgin olive oil also. Herbs and spices as well, very, very concentrated polyphenols, and again, very pungent and very bitter and protective compounds. So colorful fruit and vegetables, and they're also in whole grains and so on, but essentially colorful fruit and vegetables, and things like extra virgin olive oil and chocolate, wine, coffee, those kind of things.
Yeah, we're talking about, of course, the dark chocolates and coffee beans, so the more bitter chocolate, but not laden with the milk and the sugars and whatnot, right?
Absolutely, Claudia. Absolutely. And I would just say one thing: if your listeners are really keen on chocolate, and actually if they slightly have a sweet tooth, you can gradually go on to higher and higher cocoa concentrated chocolates, and then you begin to pick up and really love the slightly bitter, slightly pungent flavor, and you lose that craving for the sweetness. And so for me, an espresso coffee with a 100%, we're talking hard, yeah, it's 100% hardcore, uh, is my idea of heaven.
Oh, the 100, I haven't gotten that high. I think 90 is like the highest I've ever gotten. And I do love it with an espresso. I'll give it to you. A little Turkish coffee or a little espresso. That's like my jam right there too. So, I have to ask you about the wine. I have read so much about not only the resveratrol and the sugar levels. I think a lot of us are confused on where people should be or could be drinking with red wine. Can you enlighten us when now you're throwing polyphenols into that mix?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as somebody who really takes evidence-based science very seriously, I have to, with my hand on my heart, acknowledge that I might have a little bit of bias here in the studies that I look at, and the studies that that I enjoy reading tend to be the ones that give a positive vibe about red wine, because I do like a glass or two of red wine. So but that's a serious issue because I actually need to be looking at all of the science. But so red wine is really, really interesting. And I think the answer is that we need to know more, because there was some research, which was pretty good, high quality research, which did seem to show that wine, in particular red wine, with a meal contains polyphenols, which and the level of alcohol in a moderate amount is reduced if you're having it with food. So there has been some science which shows that there is some evidence that it helps and supports preventing heart disease because of the antioxidant polyphenols. They're called procyanidins as well as resveratrol. There are procyanidin wines, high wines. And interestingly, the wines of Sardinia, which is one of the blue zones, are particularly high
Really?
in procyanidin. So, there's a question about whether or not it supports heart health. However, there was a very, very big study on alcohol done 2 or 3 years ago. It was a very good study, but it was very, very big population, which showed that really pretty much any level of alcohol was potentially harmful. And what that's done is it made many public health organizations suggest that actually we should be avoiding alcohol altogether. It's not about becoming an alcoholic or getting liver disease. It's actually about an increased risk of various types of cancer, particularly cancer of the GI tract, at relatively low levels. However, that was a huge study which took alcohol and looked at, in particular, death rates. And it took all populations, young people perhaps drinking alcohol in a hazardous way, um, um, as well as people consuming sort of far too much of spirits. And so what many of us in the Mediterranean diet field want to look at is we want to look to see whether there is a small subsection, a particular way of drinking red wine, which may mitigate, may reverse some of the potential harms of the alcohol. And the Predimed study, which is a study which has really changed the way we view nutritional science, because it was such a powerful study it was a randomized controlled trial looking at different populations, one on the Mediterranean diet, showing that the reduced rate of death, heart disease, breast cancer was 30% plus benefits. That study, the authors of whom I'm very privileged to know, are doing a particular subset study to have a look to see whether red wine can be consumed safely and potentially even beneficially in this Mediterranean diet paradigm. So at the moment, I think it's okay to drink a modest amount of red wine with a Mediterranean style meal and in the Mediterranean way.
And what does that mean? In the
Well, I think it means drinking in company, drinking with food, drinking a modest amount, drinking for enjoyment. In the UK, we have a tradition of going down to a bar, a pub, and we have a glass of we have some alcohol, either a pint of beer or ladies sometimes have a glass of wine, and we have it with a packet of chips or something really unhealthy, and so the Mediterranean way is a different approach really to drinking alcohol.
fair. Okay, so you guys heard it from Dr. Poole. It's okay to have a little bit of red wine. Where do we fall on Prosecco or champagne? Has that study been out yet?
Well, that's very interesting. It's
Kind of like my little.
white wine.
Yeah.
White wine does contain some polyphenols,
Okay.
but lower quantities than
Yeah.
red wine. However, if this food could talk, the champagne would be putting its hand up saying, actually, I'm made with a red wine, a red grape.
Oh, yes, you're right. You're
And so the level of polyphenols in champagne may be slightly more
correct.
than in Prosecco or Cava. So upgrade to champagne
You're on.
if
You're
you can afford it.
Okay, that's great. That's good news. All right, let's dig deep into the Mediterranean diet. There's a lot of people throw that word around, right? How to eat in the Mediterranean way. And the Mediterranean diet is a large population of people with many different cultures and many different countries. How are you defining the Mediterranean diet, Simon?
Yeah, well, that's a really excellent question because you're right. Lots of people say, well, oh, yes, I know that the Mediterranean diet is good for me. And well, yes, I have the Mediterranean diet, a lot of people might say. And then when one actually asks the question, well, what do you think that means? Then actually it can get a little bit tricky because people begin quite quickly to run out of ideas after vegetables and fruits. And then, well, pomegranates, you know? Um, I think people can look at images, pyramids, for example, the Old Ways organization in Boston produce a pyramid which shows visually the kind of foods that are on the Mediterranean diet. But essentially, it is a diet which is really rich in vegetables. Also plenty of fruits, but it's fundamentally vegetables, whole grains, legumes, beans. We really don't consume very much beans in our SAD diet, which stands for Standard American Diet, of course.
Yeah.
We don't consume enough beans, that's for sure. But all of those grains and vegetables are consumed with extra virgin olive oil. It is absolutely ubiquitous in the Mediterranean. And I think people don't often really understand how fundamental extra virgin olive oil is. 3 tablespoons a day, is typical. And then we can go through other ingredients. For example, fish consumed reasonably regularly in many parts of the Mediterranean. Herbs and spices, again, really important as part of the Mediterranean diet. Lots of different herbs and spices. And of course, pretty much the absence of ultra-processed foods. And red meat much more rarely and in smaller quantities than we consume. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, one of your former great presidents, was a foodie. The third, that's right, was a foodie who recommended that meat should be viewed as a condiment.
Right.
to a meal of vegetables. And I think that's a really good adage to take if we think about, if we choose to consume red meat in particular, relatively modest amount, and always cooked and prepared with extra virgin olive oil, because that has an effect. The interesting thing about extra virgin olive oil is not only by itself does it seem to have very many health benefits, but it also protects us from some of the harms of some of the foods that we're consuming as well. So red meat is supported by being cooked and prepared and marinated in extra virgin olive oil, for example.
That is great. So steaks. Talk to me how would you prepare a steak? Could you talk to some of our listeners about how to, yeah, like how to marinate it and perhaps how to like drizzle and sizzle with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so. Whenever I prepare a steak, I prepare a steak using a marinade with extra virgin olive oil, perhaps a little bit of garlic if I fancy it. Definitely a few herbs and spices in there if I want to. Um, um, maybe some tomatoes, but I will marinate it in a marinade that is based on extra virgin olive oil. Um, and that I do that for two reasons. Firstly, because it tastes great. It softens the meat, prepares the meat, even if it's just 30 minutes before. But the second reason is for health, because what we know with cooking red meat is that the potential problem arises when it changes color, browns, and then in particular, if it blackens. What's happening there is we're producing compounds called heterocyclic amines, which have been implicated in bowel cancer. And what we see when we marinate it in a protective marinade, particularly with extra virgin olive oil, is that reduces the formation of these heterocyclic amines by as much as 70 to 80%.
Wow.
So that is a really, really, for me, that's a really, really important message about how to protect red meat when you're cooking. And really, in many Mediterranean recipes, the meat is cooked perhaps in a stew, perhaps or at least marinated if it's going to be grilled. So that's often a way that it's prepared in the med itself.
That's right. 70 to 80% is huge. I had no idea. Um, the I want to lean in a little bit more about the Mediterranean diet and polyphenols with vegetables mixed with once you've cooked your vegetables. I've always heard to add extra virgin olive oil over top. It magnifies the amount of polyphenols that your body is consuming, not only the nutrients, but the polyphenols and antioxidant effects. Is this true?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, there are two ways in which one can use extra virgin olive oil. First of all, in the kitchen for cooking and preparing. And incidentally, it's not only safe to cook with extra virgin oil, it is absolutely desirable to cook. We can talk if you want to about the smoke point and all of that kind of stuff. But essentially, if I'm going to cook with vegetables, when I cook it with extra virgin olive oil, though that cooking process combines these polyphenols of the vegetables with the polyphenols in the extra virgin olive oil, and their absorption is much improved because of that combination. And so whenever I cook with extra virgin olive oil, I always serve it with the oil. I always serve the vegetables with the oil. And then, as you say, I drizzle a little bit of fresh oil just to lift the flavors and to also get those additional polyphenols. You do consume some polyphenols when you're cooking at temperature with extra virgin olive, and so you can add back with a little bit of a drizzle. But cooking with extra virgin olive oil is really, really healthy because it combines nutrients, helps the absorption. And I think, again, apart from polyphenols, that's another really interesting bit of science. I mean, I think we probably know more about what goes on in the center of a comet than we do that know what goes on in the center of our food when it's being cooked. There's a lot of really fascinating science coming around the benefits of these combinations when you cook with extra virgin olive oil. And I think the other thing is always use the amount that you've got in the pan. Just use enough to coat the vegetables and cook them safely, and then serve it on the plate with the drizzle afterwards. And I would say in the Poole household, it's very acceptable to lick your plate after dinner, just scoop up, or a little bit of bread maybe, just to scoop up the extra virgin olive oil.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got a cool household, I guess. Yeah, we like to. I think it's rude if they don't lick the plates. I'm like, what's going on? You didn't like mom's cooking today?
Absolutely.
Tell me about a little bit the smoke points. There's so much confusion on whether people can cook with extra virgin olive oil or not. I don't know why there's still confusion, but I'd like to hear it from you, Simon, as an expert.
Sure. Well, so the smoke point is the point, the temperature at which an oil begins to break down. And these are oxidation and heat processes that tend to disrupt the fats and break them down. Now, the good news is that an average extra virgin olive oil, which is high in these antioxidant polyphenols, will protect the oil from ever reaching its smoke point. And we don't go near the smoke point of an extra virgin olive oil in all cooking that we do in in our home. We roast and we bake, even in deep fat frying is well below what's supposed to be the smoke point of extra virgin olive oil. But you've also got to consider the fact that actually there isn't one point at which an oil suddenly changes. It's actually about how that oil performs over a period of cooking. And there was some very good science that came out of Australia a couple of years ago, where they lined up different oils and actually used oils and cooked with them at normal cooking temperatures for 4 hours. And they looked at the formation of trans fats, and they looked at the antioxidants left in the oil, and also things called polar compounds, which are the compounds which are produced as a byproduct of oxidation, which again have potential to cause cancer. And the level of trans fats and the level of polar compounds was the lowest in extra virgin olive oil compared with grapeseed oil, sunflower oil, even canola oil, and other oils where the trans fat formation and the polar compound formation, and these are the bad compounds, was much higher after that 4 hours of cooking. So I think we can be really, really reassured. And actually, Claudia, when you think about it, if it wasn't safe to cook with extra virgin olive oil, we wouldn't be here talking about the Mediterranean diet, would we? Because in the Mediterranean, they don't use anything else in their cooking.
I know. I've also heard that it is best when you are sautéing with extra virgin olive oil, it's to sauté slowly on a medium heat. Is that true? I throw my onions and my garlic over a medium heat with copious amounts of olive oil, I have to say, so it's not burning my vegetables. Am I doing it right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the flavors are much better when you do that as well, when you cook it more slowly. The flavors are better. You don't get burnt, sticky pans. You don't have to call the fire brigade. This is the way to cook gently and slowly. And I think we're often in a rush, aren't we? Constantly rushing around trying to do things really, really super quick. But actually, I think, can take joy and pleasure from cooking. And the way you describe the way you might be sautéing and slowly and adding and so on, I think that's just a little vignette, a little sight of joy, really. I think we should be really coming back to enjoying cooking and preparing food.
Absolutely. I actually don't allow my husband to use my pans anymore because he puts it on such high heats and he ends up burning the pans and I'm like, no, no, no. Just he has his own set of pans at this point and I have mine. He likes his cast iron, so that's fine. And the grill. That's all I've kind of like allowed him to use. But yes.
Yes, well, I mean, kitchens are a place where there can be a tiny bit of difference of opinion, can't they? Because my wife quite likes her air fryer.
Uh,
The problem is that I think that air fryers don't have enough oil in them. So when she's out of the kitchen, I add extra virgin olive oil to the air fryer, and I've broken at least two because they're not designed to be used with oil. So they've kind of got clogged up. So I keep breaking her air fryers because I add extra virgin olive oil. So your husband and my wife could have a fair conversation about how disruptive you and I are in the kitchen.
yeah, I think I know I'm getting you for Christmas this year. Another air fryer, probably, or at least for your wife. Okay. So you've got three more books in the works. So why don't we give a little recap on the books that you have already written, and the three more that are coming up. I want to kind of dive into those.
Thank you. So I wrote the olive oil diet actually 10 years ago, which really started to talk specifically about extra virgin olive oil as a really important ingredient as part of the Mediterranean diet. I then wrote a book. We had a conversation, didn't we, about what is the Mediterranean diet? And people kind of talk about it and they sort of know, but don't really know the details. So the next book I wrote was The Real Mediterranean Diet, which really kind of buttoned down on some of these nuances, some of these subtleties about the Mediterranean diet that are so important to know. And then since then, I've teamed up with a absolutely delightful chef who's based in DC called Amy Riolo, who is incredibly well versed in culinary medicine, and she's a fantastic chef. And she introduced me to the people at the Dummies series, and you've probably come across the Dummies books. So I was invited to write about diabetes for dummies, diabetes nutrition for dummies, and the diabetes cookbook for dummies with Amy. So those combine the medicine with the culinary medicine, with her recipes. And really, instead of writing just about medical books, we've really focused. I mean, we've covered the ground on what medications people take and the benefits and the risks and side effects and so on. But we really have focused on nutritional lifestyle medicine. So diabetes nutrition and diabetes cookbook. And then we wrote. I persuaded the folk at Wiley's that what I really wanted to do was write olive oil for dummies. So we managed to get that published. So Amy and I wrote Olive Oil for Dummies, which is a great success. People are really enjoying just really knowing everything pretty much about extra virgin olive oil. Currently writing Cholesterol Management for Dummies, and that's due out later on this year. And then we've got some projects where, again with the Dummies people, where I'm writing 100 questions and answers about diabetes, about high blood pressure, and then finally a book on 100 questions about Alzheimer's and dementias, where it's the Dummies style of book, but we take 100 questions and then we answer those in turn. And again, the focus will very much be on how we can remain healthy and be healthy. We cover off all the important medical understanding and the medications, but it's also about how we can remain healthy and prevent those conditions in the first place.
Well done. I've heard doctors tell me that in the United States, I really don't know in the UK, that there's only one nutrition course that was covered in medical school. I don't know if that's still accurate, but so prevention and nutrition, which is it's a no-brainer for most of us. There's a correlation between health and disease, right? But doctors don't necessarily receive the systematic scientific explanation, and therefore they're not able to share it with their clients as well about nutrition for health.
That's absolutely right. And there were some studies which showed that actually the confidence level of most physicians, there was a study of cardiologists in New York, actually, where they showed that the level of confidence of cardiologists to talk about lifestyle was really very, very low indeed. And I suppose at least they were being honest, because actually we are trained very much in our medical training in the medical model, which is just to try and put people back together again when people are falling apart, which is such a pity. And I think similarly, what I've learned with Amy is that you can have chefs who really know what they're talking about in terms of nutrition. But again, chefs in general don't get very much training about nutrition. Although the Culinary Institute of America is bucking that trend and is actually really including courses about the Mediterranean diet. And there are some medical schools now that are focusing more on lifestyle. But I spoke at the European Society of Cardiologists, and I challenged the room. I said, look, ladies and gentlemen, if you had a patient who walked out of your consulting room without being on, for example, a statin, if they were at very, very high risk, that achieves a 20 to 30% reduction in their risk. You would be sued if somebody walked out of your room without having the advice that they needed to be on something that reduced a risk by 20 to 30%. And yet you say nothing about nutrition, which actually has an even more powerful effect. And so, it is really quite interesting how we look to medicines to solve problems, whereas in fact we could be really looking at the fundamentals of nutrition and of lifestyle.
Yeah, prevention. I remember in our Washington conference, in our DC conference a month ago, and I was surprised to hear it. And I don't know if I can't recall, quite truthfully, Simon, if it was you who discussed it or not. But since you brought it up, Alzheimer's and extra virgin olive oil and dementia and the relationship between it. Were you in the room with us? Was it you speaking at that point? I honestly don't remember. And maybe if you did, can you touch upon it for our audience today? Because I was really shocked with that information.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, I did cover Alzheimer's and dementia. And essentially, the Mediterranean diet is associated with very significantly reduced risks of dementia and Alzheimer's. Dementia can sometimes be formed from blood vessel problems, vascular dementia, we call it. And Alzheimer's is different, but both of them seem to be the Mediterranean diet seems to have a protective effect, probably again because of the antioxidants and anti-inflammatory elements. Just to kind of use a broad brush expression, obviously the on a molecular level, the scientific level, it's quite a complicated story, but clearly it's the foods that are preventing the cognitive decline, and so you can extend that. And there's some really interesting science coming out now where we're a group of people in Greece who had a diagnosis of early Alzheimer's dementia. And half of the group were had a diet that had very high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil, and the other group had normal, sort of low polyphenol extra virgin olive oil. This is the kind of thing that you would get in a supermarket on the lowest shelf. Often they're Italian sounding brands, but they're a blend of oils, and they're quite low in polyphenols because and we can talk about that again in a second, why that is. But interestingly, the rate of decline of cognition was much lower in those people who had the high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil in comparison with those people who had the normal extra virgin olive oil, which just goes to show that we should be looking at quality of extra virgin olive oil, because as I said earlier, if a tree is protecting itself, if a tree is slightly stressed by its environment, so it's not over irrigated, not over fertilized, it may produce lower yield, so you'll get less oil because the plant is protecting itself, but the olive tree will be producing lots more polyphenols as part of that protection. So you will get a slightly more expensive, because it's a lower yield, extra virgin olive oil that tastes a little bit more bitter, a little bit more pungent, really, really interesting, but that will be much richer in these polyphenols in comparison with the other blended extra virgin olive oils, for example.
So is that what somebody because there's not a label that says to my knowledge, most olive oils that we can find in the grocery store or the average consumer can find doesn't have a label that says the polyphenol count unless you're going to look for it. So how can a consumer understand the olive oils that have a high polyphenolic count versus a lower?
Yeah, well, that's a really, really good question. Um, there are various levels to that, because the first thing to say is that actually measuring polyphenols in itself is not quite as simple as it might seem, because there are different laboratory analyses. When you do it, there are different times. It depends when you have the oil in the store, the polyphenols may well have degraded over time, because if it's exposed to heat, light, and oxygen, those polyphenols will diminish. So the important thing is to consume an extra virgin olive oil that's fresh. So first of all, look for its harvest date. Now, many producers are now putting on a harvest date, so it needs to be a recent harvest date. Of course, there's only one harvest a year in each hemisphere, in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. But make sure it's that the most recent harvest. I think the next thing to do is to look for on the label. I mean, people might have taken a polyphenol level and put it on, but it's difficult to know exactly how reliable that is. But if you're getting an oil clearly from a proud producer, from a producer that's really saying on his label, his or her label, where they're coming from, and with great pride, then you can be pretty sure that they will value a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of pungency, a little bit of interest to the flavor and the taste, which is traditionally valued in the Mediterranean. And so you can probably figure that actually they will generally, by the taste, be quite high polyphenol. And then when you open it, get that little cough irritation at the back of your throat, which is a particular polyphenol called oleocanthal. Get that bitterness and pungency, which again softens when you have it with food. But make sure it's a really, really tasty, not a sort of bland oil that otherwise might be quite low in polyphenols. So I think it's about making sure there's a bit of provenance, a bit of authenticity to the oil, and that flavor profile, and definitely consume fresh. And when you get it home, keep it in a dark place, keep it cool, and most of all, consume it quickly,
Yeah.
which now we know how delicious it is and how we need to use it with everything and cooking it. And as you say, drizzle with it, Claudia. We know we're going to consume it pretty quickly anyway.
What does quickly mean once it's opened?
Well, that's again a really good question, because if you look at the science of the Mediterranean diet, people are consuming 2, 3, even 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil each day.
Wow.
And this is cooking, this is drizzling, this is, with every meal.
Baking.
So this is a lot of extra virgin olive oil. In fact, in parts of Greece, are consuming about 20 liters a year per head, whereas in the UK and in the US, it's probably about a liter a year. So we should be upping. I mean, these are averages, of course. So any one individual might be consuming a lot more, and many people, as we know, are not consuming any extra virgin olive oil. But the idea is to get several tablespoons a day, and don't worry about the calories, because it's been shown that if you add extra virgin olive oil to carbohydrates, it reduces the sugar rise, so it's much less likely to induce insulin resistance and so on. There are some really extra virgin olive oil does not, despite its calories, does not increase weight. I mean, obviously, if you consumed bucket loads, then probably that not as far part of the of a standard Mediterranean diet. So yes, we should be and could be enjoying much more extra virgin olive oil.
Wow. Okay. 20 liters versus, on average, in Greece versus about 1 liter in the United States or the UK. That is a lot.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And in Greece, in places like Greece, I mean, it is a little bit cheaper, of course, because they don't have transportation costs. However, the attitude in the Mediterranean is that actually it's a really, really valued commodity. I mean, it's not a commodity. It's a really, really valued food. And I think a lot of people and a lot of your listeners may be thinking, well, Mediterranean diet seems a very expensive diet. But in fact, I think if we have lots of vegetables, lots of beans, lots of plant-based foods, lots of scratch cooking, then instead of viewing a vegetable oil as being the cheapest thing in our supermarket or our shopping trolley or basket, we should be regarding it as being a really precious, really quite expensive item of our weekly or monthly shopping bill, and just give it the status that it really deserves in terms of investing in that element. And I was reading the other day that the average American spends, wait for it, $1,100 a year on coffee. 3 cups of coffee a year, 1,100.
Might not be wrong. That might not be wrong. That's crazy. But yes, that might.
Well, that's apparently according to Statistica, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So these are kind of figures that are reasonably well sourced.
Yeah.
And that's 3 cups a day. So, and people are having coffees outside. And when you think about it in that context, actually, a bottle of even quite expensive, quite premium extra virgin olive oil. And you can have a can of larger amount of oil in your kitchen. You can have a very special bottle on your table.
Absolutely.
But that puts it into perspective. The average bottle of wine is $15. Well, you can buy a pretty good extra virgin olive oil for $15. You might consume a bottle of wine in an evening or a couple of evenings, and the oil, may last you
Couple months.
7-10 days,
Oh,
even to.
you do your
I
best.
mean,
A week?
oh yes, yes.
Oh, done, Simon. I thought you were going to say a month, and I was giving it a little extra space. Well done. Oh, you are Greek, aren't you?
Oh yeah, yes. I'm an honorary
Right.
Greek, probably.
Good job. Wow. Yes, no, I do think it's a form of prevention if we're willing to spend this much money on, medicines later in life, or we don't want to get sick, right? So if we can use the science now and think of food as medicine, we should be consuming the highest quality foods that we can afford, right? That we can afford. And you can afford it if you have the time and the ability to go ahead and start cooking with legumes, with your vegetables, with your grains, and then, of course, with a good quality extra virgin olive oil. It's a full meal. It really is. That is how we eat in the
Yeah,
middle.
you're absolutely right. And at the moment, the average US citizen spends 5% of their disposable income on their food shop. This
Wow.
is for this is for use at home. If you include eating out, it's 11%. That's an average statistic, again, from the US government sources. So there's an element of choice about how much we invest. And so I don't want you know I really don't want to encourage people to be spending money when they haven't got money. And I completely accept that. I accept that. But actually, the more I've been researching and understanding the Mediterranean diet, the more I'm aware that it actually is affordable, and these perceptions about it being expensive are not right. And that's backed up by the science. Mary Flynn from Brown University did a study a number of years now ago on Rhode Island, again, showing that with extra virgin olive oil as part of a Mediterranean diet, you could reduce the monthly bills of somebody when they're cooking by $10 to $15. And that study was replicated in Australia, where it was $30 a month saved when you teach people to scratch cook, when people are using really good quality plant, like what you've said exactly, Claudia, the vegetables, the legumes, and the occasional bit of more expensive meat. 30 Australian dollars a month was saved
Wow.
using that, applying those Mediterranean style of cooking. And after all, the Mediterranean that Ansel Keys visited after the wars was not a wealthy part of the world. It was what the Italians call cucina povera, which is poor people's cooking. And so actually we can celebrate the simplicity of the Mediterranean diet, I think, and really redefine it as being an affordable diet.
Thank you so very much, Simon. This was great, honestly. Talk to us a little bit about your next venture. I think that you're moving into, you've got 3 books, which is going to keep you very busy, and I'm sure a very busy book tour. Will you be visiting the United States, first of all, on any of your book tours?
Well, I'm coming over to the US actually next week to teach my regular gig, which is with the Olive Oil Times sommelier course. So, as you know, being a sommelier, people take an interest in really, really getting a deeper dive on extra virgin olive oil, and I teach the health modules on that 5-day course. So I'm actually coming over to the States, but I'm also doing a presentation in Denver, Virginia, as well on that trip. And so I come over generally a couple of times a year, and to meet the publisher and so on. So that's very enjoyable. And yes, I do have a venture, which is that I'm just recently become involved in an olive oil venture of actually bringing an extra virgin olive oil into just the UK. And there's a bit of a story behind that, which is essentially that in the UK, at least, the olive oil market is very much about rather boring green and brown bottles sitting on a shelf really not looking terribly interesting or exciting. And in Europe, we are allowed to make a claim for health based on a level of polyphenols. And so for the first time, I have sourced and selected and worked with a producer in Andalusia to get some really high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil. And within the regulations, in discussion with our authorities, because that's the important thing, it's important to get it right. So in discussion with our trading standards, our regulators, our authorities here, we are allowed to put a heart health claim on the extra virgin olive oil because it meets the minimum criteria. We're going to put a short shelf life on it because we believe passionately that extra virgin olive oil should be consumed fresh. So I really can't get my head around the fact that it has 12 months or 18 months best before. It should be consumed way before that period. So we're putting a short shelf life on it. Yeah. And bringing it in. And we aim to be slightly disruptive and mischievous. So we're putting it in a bright pink bottle. And it's got heart healthy written all over it. And we'll see, hopefully, that will support people in coming from vegetable oils and coming from the poorer quality extra virgin olive oils, these commodity, the blends, and hopefully people will then begin to understand that actually the story about polyphenols is really important. And what I hope is that people will also then experiment with other good quality extra virgin olive oils because I don't want to monopolize the extra virgin olive oil. I want people to have a choice and to recognize that there are other really good, often high quality polyphenol extra virgin olive oils out there as well. And of course, there's plenty of room in the market for good quality extra virgin olive oils and to deliver that message because, as you know, we should be consuming 20 times more extra good quality extra virgin olive oil.
We know that now. We know that now, thanks to you, Simon. Oh, this has been wonderful. Best of luck. Do you have a name for when is it going to be? When are you going to get it to market? And do you have a name for your brand?
So literally 48 hours ago, it went to market. So it's a coincidence and it's cool. Yes, you're the first in the media to pick it up.
Ah,
Um,
honored. Thank you.
so it's called Positively Good for You, heart healthy extra virgin olive oil. And we are really going full on about the high polyphenols and about the heart health. That's our messaging coming from my particular area of interest. I mean, it tastes fabulous. It's vibrant. It's produced by a wonderful a producer in Andalusia in Spain, and it's in a very pink bottle. And as we say, it will keep you in the pink. I don't know whether that's an expression that you use in the States, but in the UK, it dates back to Shakespeare's times. Keeping you in the pink is about keeping you healthy, and so it's in a pink bottle.
Like pink.
Yes, pink cheeks and
Got
pink cheeks and yeah, and it keeps you healthy. So we're this vibrant, disruptive, slightly mischievous pink bottle amongst a sea of brown.
it. Actually, that's great. Positively healthy.
Positively good for you.
Positively good for you. I love that. Positively good for you. We were going to have all your information for access to your books so people can download are your books electronically found first of all, or are they only in hard copy? Can we get them on Amazon? And can we in the United States, actually my listeners are everywhere, but where can we get Positively Good for You as well?
Okay, so first of all, the books, because they're published by publishers who are internationally renowned, are available on all the usual sites that you would expect them to be on. Available also in bookstores themselves, and there are ebooks that you can download. And actually, separate from the ebooks, you can get Audible books. I think the diabetes one is already out on an Audible book, and we're very excited because the olive oil for dummies is going to be out on an Audible version, I think at the end of July. And with regards to the Positively Good for You, heart healthy, uh, in the pink extra virgin olive oil, at the moment it's just available through our website, just in the UK. There are logistical reasons for that, but also because it's the European Union and the UK that have taken on this polyphenol health claim, and so we we wouldn't necessarily market it in the US in the same way, because the FDA recognizes it as a healthy fat, but hasn't quite yet got to the European stage of recognizing that these particularly important, powerful polyphenols, these antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, are really key to the way in which extra virgin olive oil delivers its health.
I guess it means more speaking engagements for you in the States. I can't wait to see you.
Thank you very much, Chloe.
Simon, it has been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for sharing all of your immense knowledge. And what I really appreciate you is that you're obviously an intelligent human being, but you're using your intelligence in the research, the scientific backed research, to change how we consume, how we eat, to look at food as prevention and food as medicine for the greater public. Thank you for not dumbing it down for us, for making it super smart but consumable information. That is what I think really attracted me to having you on this show, because I just value you so very much. So thank you for spending the time to share with us your information.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for your hospitality today. It's been great fun.
All right, guys, that's it from Simon. So thank you guys.